Hello, it's John Heaton, and time for another Stones review. Going to review Goat's Head Soup, released 31st August 1973. And I was just playing this album in the car today, preparing for this. I just actually, also looking at the sleeve, noticed it's not even titled on the front. Not sure if I'd noticed that before, which is quite interesting. So you've got Mick with this funny kind of dress on. And the pictures taken by David Bailey, all of them. And apparently the intention was for Mick to look like Katharine Hepburn from The African Queen, which is an old movie. I can't remember if I've seen it or not, I think years ago. Anyway, you get the picture. And then Keith on the back here, looking pretty wasted. Of course, this album he was at the height of his heroin addiction. In fact, it would probably get worse, if anything. Then we got Bill, Charlie, and Mick Taylor on the gatefold. So nice sleeve. That's the follow-up to Exile on Main Street, and I like the packaging. And you get a nice inner sleeve here with pictures of the musicians and the producers. So Jimmy Miller here, Jim Horn, who'd played on Concert for Bangladesh, Billy Preston, who also played on Concert for Bangladesh, and obviously on Let It Be. Got Ian Stewart, the sixth stone, as he's sometimes called, on keyboards. Bobby Keys, Andy Johns, picture of Jimmy Miller, and Nicky Hopkins. So this album features three keyboardists: Billy Preston, Nicky Hopkins, and Ian Stewart. And on here it tells you which of those three plays on each track, which is quite good information. Similar to, in fact, not quite as detailed. On Exile on Main Street, they told you who was playing each instrument on every track. Here you just get who's playing the keyboard, and so you have to assume that, for example, Bill's playing bass on everything, whereas on Exile, Keith was doing the bass on occasion. Interestingly, Mick Jagger plays piano on one track, Hide Your Love, on side 2, which is quite unusual. I seem to remember he played piano on Faraway Eyes as well, so it's not unknown, but that came later, of course. This album tends to get forgotten a little bit in comparison to Exile. Everyone's always raving about Sticky Fingers and Exile, and indeed the sequence of albums they had from Beggar's Banquet through Let It Bleed and Sticky Fingers and Exile. And then this album gets forgotten, perhaps not because it didn't get to number one. It was a huge seller. I think it sold 6 million or something to date. But perhaps not quite as brilliant, although there are many fine moments on this record. I know a lot of people really like this record. My good friend Dave Costello, I know it's one of your favourites, so I was happy to hear it again. Hadn't heard it in a while, and thought I'd review it. Maybe, as I've said on other reviews, what tends to put one off when you reach for an album is if you don't like the opening track, and I have a bit of a problem with Dancing with Mr. D. I just think it's a little bit insubstantial as a song and doesn't really go anywhere. It's got a reasonable riff and stuff, but it's just pretty unmemorable. And compared to Rocks Off, the opener of Exile, which is sheer brilliance immediately, or compared to Brown Sugar or some of the other openers from the Stones in their career, Sympathy for the Devil, Give Me Shelter. This is a pretty poor start to the album, but thankfully it recovers. So I'll go through the tracks in a minute. I just want to talk about some of the reviews which came along for this album at the time. The famous Rolling Stone journalist Bud Scopper called the album one of the year's richest musical experiences, while Lester Bangs was less favourable, saying there is a sadness about the Stones now because they amount to such an enormous so what. The sadness comes when you measure not just one album, but the whole sense they're putting across now against what they once meant. So that's pretty negative. I think in retrospect people see it as a solid album, but maybe not brilliant. What else can we say before we go through the tracks? Also featured on this album is a percussionist called Rebop, who played percussion with Traffic on Low Spark of High Heel Boys and Shoot Out at the Fantasy Factory, and When the Eagle Flies as well, I think. I can't remember if he played on that last one, but he played with Jim Capaldi on Shortcut Draw Blood. Actually, I don't think he played on When the Eagle Flies. Anyway, I went to his benefit concert in 1983, which Jim Capaldi was hosting, and Roscoe G was there. Rick Gretsch was there, who's since passed away as well, but Steve Winwood wasn't. Anyway, so Rebop's on percussion. What else? I also mentioned which tracks were done live, but I think I'll go through. Oh, of course, we have to show you. So that the album's not got the name Goat's Head Soup on the front, but the insert, which comes with the album, is pretty graphic. So remove any doubt about this, that you bought the right album. This is Goat's Head Soup indeed, and suitably grotesque picture. Quite a laugh. Got blue tack on the back because I obviously had it on the wall at one stage. So anyway, back to the album. Yeah, very strong recovery after Dancing with Mr. D with 100 Years Ago, which is one of the best pieces by the Stones from this period. Mick Taylor on very nice guitar and a kind of a mid-pace rocker, and very good, excellent, love it. And then Coming Down Again, a lovely ballad from Keith, although the subject matter is pretty obviously about coming down off some drug or other, or his personal life. You know, there's quite an amusing line, stuck my tongue in someone else's pie. It's quite a depressing song, but on the other hand, it's nicely sung by Keith, and it's got a nice slow groove to it. He sings it well, although he sounds in quite a lot of pain, or maybe the pain has been numbed by something or other. Anyway, so that's that. Then we get another very strong track, Heartbreaker, which found its way onto Made in the Shade, the compilation, which came out in '74. I think that and Angie were the only two tracks selected from this album. And it's just, again, one of the best pieces by the Stones of this period, and great guitar from Mick Taylor and Keith playing together. And then Angie closes side one, and it's just a beautiful ballad. I don't need to add too much more to what you guys already know that track. And there's a beautiful video for that with the Stones. Not sure where it's recorded, but they've all got roses in their guitars, and Mick sitting on a stool in the middle, and it's very, very good video. I can't remember videos to the Heartbreaker one, to be honest, but it's a lovely ballad, and the Stones not often known for their ballads, but this one and Wild Horses from Sticky Fingers are two of their very best from the Mick Taylor period. And there's some decent ballads on Exile as well. I just want to read you a quote from Mick Jagger at the time of Goat's Head Soup's release, where he said, I really feel close to this album, and I really put all I had into it. I guess it comes across that I'm more into songs. It wasn't as vague as the last album, which kind of went on so long that I didn't like some of the things. There's more thought to this one. It was recorded all over the place over about 2 or 3 months. The tracks are much more varied than the last one. I didn't want it to be just a bunch of rock songs. So interesting to see Mick being quite negative about Exile, by implication, really. I know Exile has had the reputation as being more of a Keith album, but Mick sings brilliantly on it. But certainly at the time, he seems to prefer this album, which is quite interesting. I think this album is underrated for sure, and it's got some hidden gems on it which aren't very well known, and a lot of them haven't been played live in concert very often, so they're not kind of done to death or overexposed on the radio. And so that I've covered side one. So moving on to side two, Silver Train is a kind of it's an okay Stones rocker. It's nothing brilliant. It reminds me a bit of All Down the Line from Exile in that vein. It's decent. It's just not very memorable for me. Apologies to any of you out there who think it's brilliant. They did play this a couple of times in concert at the time, and then I've just been reading they dug it out for the recent set lists, along with Dancing Mr. D. They dug that one out as well. Let me see what else was played live. Angie was played live on the 73 tour, so was Heartbreaker. And the rest of side 2, after Silver Train, never been played live, apart from Star Star at the end, which I'll come to. Coming Down Again, never been played live. So after Silver Train, we've got Hide Your Love, which is mainly memorable for Mick Jagger playing the piano, which is quite unusual, and it's quite a nice song. It sounds a bit like a demo, but it's they left it on the album for some reason. And before I forget to mention, a couple of tracks turned up onto 2U, where the backing track had been recorded for these sessions, which was basically the whole album was recorded in Jamaica. The Stones were out of England for tax reasons, and those 2 tracks, Tops and Waiting on a Friend, particularly Waiting on a Friend, it's an absolute classic, and I can't think why they didn't pursue that song and include it on this album, because it definitely would have strengthened side 2 if they'd put that on somewhere. Mick Taylor is on guitar, and he rightly claimed money for his contribution and got some, apparently. So Hide Your Love, and then we've got Winter, which was, I was quite pleasantly surprised by this track listening to it today, because I'd kind of forgotten about it. It's a nice ballad, and it's got some nice strings, nice cellos, arranged presumably by Jimmy Miller, the producer, and nice guitar solo from Mick Taylor. Pretty much a forgotten song. Even I'd forgotten it, really, and quite nice to come back to it. I mean, it's not brilliant, but it's pretty damn good. And then Can You Hear the Music is, I suppose you could describe it as filler, but it's quite interesting filler, and with some quite interesting guitar effects on this track. Kind of a spacey feel. It's okay, but then they saved the best for last. The best track on the whole album for me is Star Star at the end. I think this is the definitive version on this album. They've tried to do it live on the 73 tour. There was a version on Love You Live. I think they've tried it since as well, and they always do it too fast, or they do something, and Jagger's not singing it particularly well. But on this version, the whole band is on top form, and they sound really tight. And there's a brilliant guitar solo in the middle, and the words are pretty hilarious. So the song is about groupies who made themselves available to the band over the years, and pretty amusing words, and even a reference to "I'll make bets you're going to get John Wayne before he dies" in the last verse. So Star Star, they couldn't call it by its proper name because it would have probably offended a few people, and I don't think it was played on the radio for the same reason, although apparently there is a censored version, which I haven't heard, without the F word, but that would kind of ruin the song for me, I think. So yeah, Star Star, no less than in my top 5 Stones songs of all time. Brilliant. And then, as I mentioned, some other really strong material. So the follow-up to It's Only Rock and Roll, so the follow-up to this would be It's Only Rock and Roll, which wasn't quite as good, but on this one, it's often called the end of their golden period. Kind of, well, with pun not intended with the cover. I'd more or less go along with that. But, you know, there's enough genius here to keep one's interest, and that's why I come back to it fairly often. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.